Hello everyone, and welcome to the Week 11 online class. Today I'm going to do a quick overview of multiliteracies as a concept that you could be reading about this week. You don't have to, I know you have a lot on your plate, but I'm encouraging you to try to cover the readings because this topic in particular provides a good opportunity for critical reflection on your unit outline, to think about where are the opportunities to incorporate the explicit teaching of multiliteracies. So I'll just have a quick run through the concept of multiliteracies to encourage you to engage with the set reading for this week and to use it to reflect on your assignment, or rather your unit outline, not your assignment, your unit outline, which is part of the assignment. So, this week we're thinking about what this term multiliteracies means, and it's often used to refer to a multiplicity of communications, channels and media. Multiplicity means multiple channels, multiple media, but also multiple types or varieties. So many and varied is the key point to be made here. And that means, of course, for you, you have a lot of choice as to how you incorporate multiliteracies in your program. Something that's less commonly considered is the concept of cultural and linguistic diversity as also contributing to that concept of multiliteracies. So the increasing salience of cultural and linguistic diversity means that increasingly we have more diverse range of cultural and linguistic student backgrounds in our classes. So when we talk about salience, we think about the pervasiveness of it. It's quite widespread, it's now quite common, increasingly so, rather than, say, 20 years ago when it was very unusual. So let's start with the first concept, which is the most common and one that is perhaps has the most practical application here, but you know, that's questionable when we go back and think about the implications of the second aspect of multiliteracy. So just to remind you, communications, channels and media, where's my little pointer, and cultural and linguistic diversity. And much of this has come about not just because of wars and the result of people crossing borders to flee persecution or disadvantage, but also the increased influences and outcomes of technology, which means that people and organizations and businesses now operate on a global rather than a local scale. And of course, with that, we have people transferring across work sites, teachers teaching all around the world and moving around. So this is this has quite an impact, not just in terms of pedagogy, because we're working in different cultural contexts, but also linguistic awareness, because we're working with students who have various language backgrounds. So if we think about communications channels and media, we're thinking about modes of communication. And some of those modes may be auditory, so what we hear, some of them visual, what we see, and for those who may not be able to hear and or see, then there is also the important input of touch, sign language, and the notion of taste as well actually can come into play, and I'll explain that when I talk about synesthesia, which I'm up to now actually, which is a particular interesting phenomenon. I encourage you to have a look online and to look at some videos as well about synesthesia, and what this particular phenomenon is a result of the brain connecting other senses to interpretation of reading or of sounds, experiences, colours and so on. For example, let's say we listen to someone reading a book, and the words, as certain words are read, the sounds of those words may induce certain tastes. You might have certain aromas, you might smell certain scents, or you might see colours as you hear that reading. And similarly, as you read and you're looking at a text, each colour, each letter might be associated with a colour. There are many different forms of synesthesia, and I don't think I was watching a very interesting video just a minute ago on the topic where a person was explaining that they find languages very easy to learn because every word has a colour, or every meaning is associated with a colour, and that colour, when they read a word with that meaning, it's associated with the colour. So they find vocabulary acquisition in new languages very easy. It's a very interesting phenomenon, but it also has implications for you as a teacher. If you find that you have a student in your classroom who has the experience of synesthesia. So this is also significant because it points to the importance of multiple informational inputs to guide our understanding of the texts that we design or that we read and respond to. And in our reading for this week, the point is made, there's a reference to the word synesthesia, but it's used in a different way, and it's used to explain that children tend to be guided by visual, auditory and kinesthetic modes, so movement, the sense of location and movement of the body in space. But when we read about synesthesia in a medical context, we see that this extends to even a sense of taste, associations, and aromas and so on. Now, I've taken a couple of little clips out of our reading just to encourage you to have a look at aspects of it and reflect on its relevance or irrelevance to your unit plan. Well, your unit plan could be on anything, but you're going to think about where are the opportunities for teaching writing in this unit plan. Where are the opportunities, just as equally, for teaching multiliteracies in the unit plan? So we can see here that G is referring to video games. Are you using any video games in your unit plan? I'm not suggesting you should, but have you thought about video games as a genre? And how can video games support students' learning of writing? Certainly, G recommends, or argues at least, that the use of video games encourages active and critical thinking, appreciation and understanding of design, text design, problem-solving skills, principles of semiotics, as in images working with words, with actions and symbols. Semiotics being related to the making of meaning, the communication of meanings. Identity principles in taking on different personalities and working within their logic, so it's very much about point of view. And understanding what it means to work within cultural models of beliefs, values and so on. And this is important because we're thinking about cultural diversity in our classroom. So how would people from different cultural backgrounds or who have different beliefs respond or act in a particular situation? And, you know, what's important here is how can language help us to explore people's responses? How can we use language to encourage others to think about how relationships are formed through conversations, through actions, because certainly body language communicates something to others as well. So, thinking about video games, you could perhaps show a video game with no text and ask students to write the text. Or you could write text and you could ask students to design a few, prepare a few drawings in preparation for a video game design. So the importance here is that we don't think of writing as a skill set quite separate from all the other ways that we explore our experiences of and within the world. We should also bring in all our senses. You've probably come across the 5 senses technique for writing, where you might describe a character or an environment or a phenomenon, a situation, and you bring all 5 senses into play. So what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? So there could be a bitter taste in your mouth, for example. Your mouth was dry and the smell made you feel brought nausea up in your throat. You know, this is the kind of detailed response about what it's like to be in a particular situation. And hopefully it's a nice situation. So you might say the smell of roses made your mouth water, and, you know, a sweet taste in my mouth reminded me of my mother's strawberry cake, or something like that, you know, bringing all those senses into play. Oh, did I say them? Oh, and touch. And when I put my hand above the plate, the warmth of the, you know, I could feel the steam tickling the palm of my hand. All of this kind of thing really is best undertaken in a kinesthetic manner. So take the student into an environment and ask them to put themselves in the protagonist's shoes. Close your eyes and perhaps give them a set of articles to feel, you know, maybe sand. This is from the soil beneath your feet, or it could be crusty pieces of clay and so on. Anyway, I'm hoping I'm giving you an idea about the importance of considering multimodal forms contributing to students' ability to express in language, either spoken or written text. And also, you know, also design such texts. So think about the genres. You know, this is just from the reading for this week, but it's useful for encouraging you to reflect. So what genre are your students working with in your unit outline? Is it just the one or maybe more? And okay, so you've got a particular genre. So what kind of text are you using? What's the main function? Is it an audio recording? Is it a science textbook? Is it a set of, or is it a poster? So what is the function of the text in your unit context? And what kind of language, or when I say discourse, a discourse is a way of talking about a thing. It's very much tied up with register. So let's say if you're positioning yourself, your point of view is representing a teacher, you can imagine that the language you use to represent that teacher as they speak to others might be very different from the language you use for another character. Let's say you've got writing a narrative, and you've got 2 characters, one's a teacher, one's a young student. The discourse that represents those individuals will differ. A child, for example, would use more simple language, maybe shorter sentences, whereas the teacher may perhaps be more directive, may sound a little bit opinionated. It's entirely up to the context. So that's just giving you an example. And how much identity, let's say a child is reading, and a child has certain out-of-school context, how much of that child's knowledge of the world is relevant to the reading of the text? Who's the intended audience for this text? And, you know, I'm not even sure which text I'm referring to, whether it's the one that the student's writing, you want the student to write, or the one that you want students to read as a model for writing. So you can see that there are a number of questions here that will help you to think about where is the reading and writing in my unit of work? How are they aligned? Are the readings there to support the writing as a model for the writing? Or is the reading really just there to introduce the content knowledge? But that doesn't mean that my writing, the writing that you want students to do, is of the same genre, in which case, how will you introduce and explain and provide a model for that genre that you want your students to write in? Is there a focus on photographs or illustrations, or could there be in your unit? Should the text be viewed in 1, 2, or 3 dimensions? So 1 dimension might just be reading the text. 2 dimension, perhaps you could have a lovely poster up there with an image. 3 dimensions, perhaps you do a role play or do a freeze frame to represent a particular part of the text. Again, in our set reading for the week, here's a focus on reading. And of course, so important, as I mentioned earlier, reading is our model for writing. If we want students to write in a particular genre. So here's an example. Get on the web and visit 3 websites, some instructions for the student. Chart how you navigate through those websites and write down your path, where it led you to. So what did you find? And then look at the web page in greater detail. Analyze where written text sits. Now, you know, if you look at any web page, you'll often see that there is a menu that either runs across the top, so a navigational toolbar, or perhaps it sits down the side. It's one or the other usually. And yes, have a look. There's usually an image or a banner across the top that really grabs your eye so that immediately you see what this page is about. Have a look at some websites. Have a look at perhaps some very popular websites. Shopping, it could be a shopping one. It could be a travel website. Lonely Planet, for example. Could be a government website. Have a look around and see how those websites communicate a particular feel, either of authority or, in the case of the travel, perhaps of adventure and travel, you know, the desire, Wanderlust, you know, itchy feet, you know, something that makes you want to travel. Or with shopping, something that suggests, you know, what a great buy. How does it catch your eye? And how does it make it easy for you to navigate through to what you need to find? So, and think about the logic of your reading path. And the reason this is so important for you to ask students to do is because often what we know about websites are implicit. We just do it, but we don't think about it. So talking through what you're doing and why you're doing it makes you see the structure of websites rather than just overlooking them and searching without thinking, you know, just wandering around, following your mouse around the page, for example. That will actually also encourage you to think about the effectiveness of website designs. And, you know, at what point did you feel compelled to move away and link to another website? These are some thoughts that I hope will encourage you to reflect on, gee, I wonder if this kind of activity with a focus on web design or web navigation techniques would fit in mine. If so, why? If not, don't worry about it, you know. And if so, then you might be able to discuss the possibility of including this on reading such and such. You know, you realize that it would be great to include an activity in this point here in your unit, because this would engage the student and support their understanding of X, Y, or Z. That was a notable issue in Assignment 1 work sample. Again, here's another example. This one's making comic books in a grade 7 class, and of course you're encouraged to read that article because it does have some very good ideas. Another thing I want you to do is have a bit of a search around the web using the word multiliteracies and classroom or primary class. And, you know, I did that today and came up with a film education website, which is a very handy one. I think I've also got another link to a very good film association for teaching website in our unit outline. But the main thing is that this particular site, you just need to put in some of these keywords and it should bring it up, film education. And it's got little trailers for different age groups, and it's got a little worksheet. And here, if you click here, you've got more. So this is actually a model that you can work through with your students. And here you can click on this and you've got other examples that students can work on independently. Again, encouraging students to think about semiotic devices. So it's not just the words, it's not just what's said. It's also about the colours that are used to represent certain individuals, to create mood, body language, and juxtaposition of images within a shot. You know, that's so important to also think about music. You know, it's got all of that here. With something like that, you know, use of intertext. So you might be reading something about what it was like living in the era of, you know, the cave dwellers, and then you might connect that with, well, how is that represented? Is this realistic, and why are they representing it this way? How does it make you feel? Would you like to live here? And how does this compare with the reality? You know, if you're doing history or something about science or anything like that. And I think this is, oh no, it's not the final slide. This is just one from my search as well. This is a nice little activity in the classroom where the students are creating, using software, they're creating a very short narrative. I think one of them was creating fairy tale Humpty Dumpty. But what's important is the interaction between students, the use of language, talking about texts. Where do you think this should be positioned? You know, should we be looking down or looking up? How big do we make this image? Which perspective do we represent? Represent in this image, and so on. So I've got the URL up here. If you want to watch it, it gives a nice overview of multiliteracies in the classroom. And finally, we're getting to the second part of the multiliteracies, the ones that are not often spoken about, but which is incredibly important when you're talking about the use of language in your classroom. And I've got this list here. Now, they're not meant to be in any hierarchy, political or intellectual, cultural hierarchy. No, that's not the intention. This is meant to represent the notion of world Englishes. And you can see up here we've got Australian, American, UK Englishes. I say Englishes because you think about Cockney in London, Scouse in Liverpool, Geordie in Newcastle, Mancunian in Manchester, Tyke, Scots. You know, you think about the different areas of a country, and people have slightly different accents. And of course, we have also code switching that happens across these accents as people travel. So this is another important part of, or issue, and that is mobility. So as we move from one place to another, we pick up certain ways of saying things and phrases and carry them over to our next context. So English is not fixed. It's not cut and dried. There are no clear boundaries. We know that as much as we strive to create a single Australian version of English, what we're doing is we're suggesting that this is better than other forms, when in fact it's just another version, one that's endorsed by the government and one that has a certain amount of prestige attached to it if you can demonstrate your proficiency with standard Australian English. So the green represents what Crutchrew refers to as the inner circle of English, where people in these countries speak English as their mother tongue. The second group in blue represent, well, you can see here, countries which have been colonies of UK empiricism. What is not empiricism, but colonialization, I'll use that term. And as a result, many of the local people and organizations have taken on the language of, or I don't like to say the masters, but the language of the oppressor, might be a better word. And after British rule has had its time, the countries have decided to maintain English as their national, or their language of governance. Let's just put it that way, because in some cases English continues to carry with it a certain amount of authority and prestige, because there are many languages in each of these countries, spoken in each of these countries, and it's convenient to have one language for governance, for the purpose of governance. So language is very political. And the language of schooling and education is also undertaken in English. And that's why these are called outer Englishes. And here we have expanding Englishes in the purple, and these are countries that are increasingly using English as the lingua franca. So for business, English is required to be studied in school, not because it's seen to be a better language necessarily, but one that functions to support the economic interests of the country, rather than here where it was there was a political vision, not just economic but political vision, for uniting the country under a particular cultural frame, not necessarily British. Another important thing I wanted to say about these countries is that these English that was once British has morphed. It's no longer British English necessarily, but has adjusted, we could say it's been indigenized to represent concepts, values, beliefs, foods, geography of the country itself. In other words, you know, a lot of what British language refers to are perhaps things that are in the environment or that are socially or culturally everyday experiences, but they've gone by the wayside here because they're no longer appropriate. Instead, there's been a shift to use, perhaps incorporate part of their own language and have a mixture. In Singaporeese, for example, is a mixture of, well, Singaporean English is a mixture of, or Singlish, often referred to as Singlish, is a mixture of English, Malay and Chinese. So you can see how English changes and is adapted to the environment in which it's used. Whereas in these contexts, because it's not seen to be embedded in the culture and history of the place, language is generally used directly from one of these inner circle Englishes, and it's used as correctly, I say correctly with, you know, little speech marks around it, because it's intended solely for business or professional interactions with English speakers. You see the difference between these forms of English. And the meaning then, the significance of this for teaching of multiliteracies is that you don't suggest that there is only one English, but that you are very aware that there are multiple and equally valid forms of English, and your job as a teacher is not to police the use of English in your classroom, but to encourage a greater understanding and tolerance for language difference, and a welcoming and an exploration, seeing different Englishes, varieties of English, as a not a backward step, but actually a forward step, one that represents more appropriately the beliefs and culture of a particular individual and their background. So that's it for now. That's week 11. I will be online in week 12. I'm not sure if I'll have a lecture, but I'll be there just in case you have any questions. So bye for now, and thanks for listening.